You know, the mid-20th century, it was basically the Wild West for aviation. I mean, engineers weren't just building planes. They were daring the laws of physics to stop them. They were coming up with stuff that just sounds impossible. Planes that were totally lopsided, tiny jets that lived inside other planes, and even fighters that landed on a wire. They weren't just pushing the envelope, they were trying to rip it right open. So that really gets you thinking, right? What if the rules of flight were actually meant to be broken? Because that's exactly the question these designers were asking themselves. It's like they took the official rulebook for aerodynamics and just tore out a few pages. So let's jump in and look at 3 of the most mind-bending experiments from this era, and we'll throw in one that tried to rewrite the whole book.
First, we're going to look at a plane that broke maybe the most fundamental rule of all, symmetry. Yeah, this thing was built lopsided on purpose, and when you see it, your first thought is just, there's no way that flies straight.
After that, we're diving into the wild concept of a parasite fighter. We're talking about a tiny but deadly jet that was designed to be carried inside a giant bomber, get launched in the middle of a flight, and then, get this, be recovered. It was literally a flying aircraft carrier. Pure sci-fi. And to top it all off, we're going to see a jet that tried to just get rid of the runway entirely. It took off straight up like a rocket and landed by pulling off this incredibly delicate trick, catching a wire with its nose. Absolutely wild. All right, so let's kick things off with one of the weirdest looking planes ever made, the Blohm & Voss BV-141. Seriously, you just look at a picture of it and the first thing you think is, how in the world did that thing fly in a straight line? Believe it or not, there was some serious logic behind this crazy design. Back in 1937, the German Air Ministry had a problem. They needed a spy plane with a perfect, totally clear view. But on any normal plane, what's right in front? The engine, right? It's always in the way. So the designer, Richard Vogt, came up with this radical solution. Why not just move the crew? He put them in their own separate cockpit, this glass pod, off on the wing, and just like that, they had an incredible, unobstructed view with no engine or propeller blocking anything. So you're probably wondering, if this thing actually worked, and it did, which is amazing, why aren't all our planes lopsided today? Well, it all came down to the hard realities of war. See, there was already a more normal-looking plane, the FW-189, being built that did the job just fine. But the bigger issue was the engine. The BV-141 used a really powerful engine that was desperately needed for proven fighter planes. So in the end, this radical new idea just couldn't compete with good old-fashioned practicality. Okay, so our next design is trying to solve a totally different puzzle. Fast forward to the Cold War. The US has this new problem. Their huge B-36 bombers could fly for ages, deep into enemy territory. But their fighter escorts? No way. They'd run out of gas long before the bomber got anywhere near its target. The solution they came up with sounds like something from a comic book. Let's build a flying aircraft carrier. And that brings us to this idea of a parasite fighter. The concept itself was pretty simple, even if it sounds crazy. You take a small, zippy little fighter jet and you tuck it right into the bomb bay of a giant B-36. If enemy planes showed up, the bomber would just open its belly, drop the fighter out, and once the coast was clear, it would snag it back on a trapeze, all in midair. And this whole idea evolved at lightning speed. It started with this tiny, custom-built plane, the XF-85 Goblin, and then moved to the Facon project, where they tried to use a more normal fighter jet. But here's the thing, technology was moving even faster. Just as they were starting to get the hang of it, something new came along, reliable in-flight refueling. And just like that, poof, the whole flying aircraft carrier idea became obsolete pretty much overnight. And I cannot overstate how dangerous this was. Just try to put yourself in the pilot's shoes. On the Goblin's very first real flight, the pilot, Edwin Schork, he detaches, flies around, everything's great. But then he tries to hook back up. The turbulence coming off that massive bomber was so insane, it was tossing his little jet around like a leaf. He got thrown forward and smashed his cockpit canopy right into the trapeze. He had to make an emergency belly landing out on a dry lake bed, in a plane that didn't even have landing gear. Just incredible. After a bunch of failures and close calls like that, the company that built it, McDonnell, basically had to admit defeat. Their own report said it all. They were like, look, if our absolute best, most experienced test pilots can't do this reliably, there is no way a regular combat pilot is going to manage it in the heat of a real mission. The margin for error was basically zero. So you have to ask, why even attempt something so incredibly risky? Well, this quote from Bud Anderson, who flew in the later FICON program, really puts it into perspective. He said, well, there was a Cold War going on, and we were doing everything we could to gain an advantage. The stakes were just that high. They had to explore every single idea, no matter how crazy or dangerous it seemed. This wasn't just for fun. It was an urgent scramble to solve a huge military problem.
Okay, so we've seen them break the rule of symmetry and the rule of needing to land on the ground. What's next? How about getting rid of the runway completely? Think about it. During the Cold War, a long runway is a giant, unmissable target. So the solution was simple in theory. Build a jet that doesn't need one. And that's where the Ryan X-13 Vertijet comes in.
The way this thing flew it's hard to wrap your head around. The X-13 didn't have wheels. It literally hung nose up from a special trailer. To take off, it just lit its engine and went straight up like a rocket. Then, once it was in the air, the pilot would gently nudge the nose over and start flying like a normal jet. But the landing, that was the real show. The pilot had to fly back to the trailer, tip the plane back up into a vertical hover, and then slowly, carefully lower it down until a hook on its nose caught a wire. It's just unbelievable.
So the planes we've looked at so far, they were all about solving very specific problems, just in really weird ways. But there was one program that wasn't just about breaking one rule. It was about smashing every boundary it could find. Speed, altitude, even the line between our atmosphere and outer space. We're talking about the North American X-15, and it might just be the most ambitious experimental plane ever built. I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. 4,520 miles per hour. That is Mach 6.7. That record was set back in 1967 by pilot William J. Knight, and it is still the official world record for the fastest anyone has ever flown in a powered aircraft. It's never been broken.
But the X-15 wasn't only about pure speed. This thing was a genuine rocket plane. They'd strap it under the wing of a B-52, fly up to 45,000 feet, and just drop it. It flew so high that its pilots literally flew into space. One pilot, Joseph Walker, took it over 67 miles up. He and 7 other X-15 pilots actually earned their astronaut wings for flying it. And yeah, you might recognize one of those names. A guy named Neil Armstrong flew it 7 times, long before he took one small step on the moon.
So in the end, the X-15 was way more than just a cool record breaker. It was really our first bridge to space. See, when you're that high up, there's no air for your wings and rudders to work, so how do you steer? The X-15 used tiny little rocket thrusters, the exact same kind of system that every single crewed spacecraft has used ever since. All the data they got from this plane about flying at insane speeds and re-entering the atmosphere, it was absolutely critical for building the space shuttle.
And that kind of brings us full circle. You look at the BV-141, the Goblin, the Vertijet. And yeah, by most standards, they were failures. They never went into mass production. But their ideas are still flying today. That lopsided plane taught us about thinking way, way outside the box. The Parasite fighter was one of the first looks at launching vehicles from the air. The Vertijet's research into vertical takeoff and landing, you can see its DNA in the F-35B today. And the X-15, well, its success literally gave us the blueprint for space travel. It just goes to show you that sometimes even when you fail, breaking the rules is exactly what you need to do to invent the future.